This is an attempt, the first one actually, to produce an audible version of the Crackerhead Chronicles in my own voice. If it is not already, it will soon become obvious that I don't know much about audio engineering, video editing, nor digital graphics. I have that on good authority, I'm told. Of course, my darling wife Arlinda would be a whole lot more enthusiastic about this project if I sounded a whole lot more like the celebrated American actor Sam Elliott. I wonder if there's an app for that. Anyway, let's move on to the 13th crumb, Amarillo. I don't remember just how it came about, but it was because of having an interest in enrolling in the saddle making program at TSTI, Texas State Technical Institute, that I thought that the panhandle of Texas might be a good place for me to be for at least a little while, for Amarillo was a location for one of the TSTI campuses. No, I never got around to enrolling, for after my brother dropped me off on Amarillo Boulevard, I did some research on the craft, and I did not like what I discovered. For the truth of the matter was that even those who had received a degree in saddle making had to complete an apprenticeship under an established master, which could take up to 20 years if they hoped to ever make a living from their work. For a cowboy doesn't make a lot of money, and if they are going to invest over $1,000 on a custom-made saddle, surely they are going to get one that is made by someone they can brag about. I still wanted to stay in Amarillo, however, for I was absolutely fascinated with the area, and even having to live out of a $300 car that I bought the day I arrived for the first few weeks could not dampen my enthusiasm. Yes, I suppose that I was homeless at the time, but I was totally unaware of it, for that was before the term came into fashion. No, that is not to say that I was totally unaware of my circumstances, for every night brought another adventure in finding a safe place. The boulevard was like a war zone at times, to sleep where the cops would leave me alone, and with me being so sweet, and an abundance of mosquitoes were always around. No, being homeless did not mean that I was unemployed, for I had secured a job as a floor stalker at the Levi Strauss plant a mile or so east of the Amarillo city limits on US 60, old Route 66, within a week of my arrival. And a week or so later, I got a night job as a delivery driver / dishwasher for a Pizza Inn on the north side access road to I-40, around 7 miles southwest of Levi's. From time to time, I also supplemented my income with some day work on different ranches and feedlots in the area. Those jobs would include anything from fixing fence to helping with a roundup. I even tried my hand at small association rodeoing a bit, for all it took was a $30 entry fee per event and some borrowed equipment, which would include a horse when competing in steer wrestling, calf roping, and team roping. No, I never made it into the money, which required placing in the top 3 in a particular event. But I was told on a number of occasions that I sure was entertaining, or something similar, when entered in saddle bronc riding. Some even went as far as to say that the way I was often bucked off reminded them of some of the stuff that they had seen while watching televised coverage of the springboard diving competition at the Olympics the summer before. To be honest, I did not always appreciate their appreciation as much as I probably should have. So, why was I still living out of my car? Well, it came down to a matter of priorities, for instead of spending my hard-earned money on rent and utility bills, I could spend it on beer, and with enough beer in me, I did not really care where I was. Besides, things were gradually getting a little easier for me, for the owners of the car lot where I bought my mobile home invited me to stay in their office and look after the place after hours, and I helped pay them back some by effecting a citizen's arrest upon a man who had defrauded them out of several $1,000s. Evidently, he was an old hand at defrauding people, for the detective who took my statement told me that the Amarillo Police Department referred to him as being the rubber stamp bandit. It was not all good, however, for despite holding down 2 full-time jobs and all of those part-time gigs, I was still not always able to buy enough beer, and it was during those times when even the added amenities that the car lot office had to offer became most intolerable. Therefore, I set about to find better accommodations, and I did not have to look far, for at $75 a week, the Wagon Wheel Motel just down the boulevard a few blocks seemed like the place to be. Hey, how could I have chosen otherwise? For the room came with several neighbors, and what a group they were. For I was surrounded by hookers, drug dealers, dope fiends, axe murderers, cannibals, sexual deviants, and serial killers in training. In other words, I was right in my element at the time, and with the Cattlemen's Club being just a couple of blocks west, I could not ask for more. For the Cattlemen's Club reminded me of the Brandon Iron, and it was not long before I was recognized as being a regular there. Be assured that being a regular at the Cattlemen's Club also had its benefits. Nothing like I enjoyed at the Brandon Iron, but being a familiar face did give me an advantage come closing time. For barflies will often look for a safe place to land. Hey, when you adhere to a standard of 8 to 80, crippled or crazy, if they can't walk, I'll drag 'em, there's not much left to just say no to. Cheering me on was a bartender by the name of Sylvia, whom I never got to first base with, for she was just too focused upon making as good of a living as she could for her children. Bartending was her night job, to make time for any romantic escapades with the likes of me. Oh yes, she knew me well, and that is what makes what happened one night at the Cattlemen's Club so interesting. For when Sylvia saw me, she complimented on looking so sharp in a Western-style suit, bolo tie, and a brand-new light gray resist-all cowboy hat the night before. Now, I was about as vain as anyone I knew of back then, but I was still quite shocked to hear what she had to say, for I had signed up to do some day work for a ranch north of town, and I was around 30 miles away the night in question. Much to my disappointment, that was all there was to it, for the other me was never seen around the place again. Since then, I have learned a thing or two about doppelganger twins, who are supposedly two identical-looking people without a speck of related blood between them. And a few years after the Cattlemen's Club incident, I met a lady at a truck stop in Ozona, Texas, who swore up and down that she thought that I was her brother when she first saw me. In fact, she admitted that it had taken her a bit to think otherwise, and she was still looking at me funny when we parted company. Whether or not her brother was the sharp-dressed man at the Cattlemen's Club that night, I do not know, for when I asked her if he ever got up to Amarillo looking like that, she said that she did not have a clue. Considering the fact that her brother had been born and raised in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and was driving a dump truck down there at the time, I have my doubts. Anyway, let us get back to me living in Amarillo, and just how special the Cattlemen's Club was. For aside from being a place where I could fulfill my wanton desires, it was also where I first met Margie. Talk about his mysterious ways, such was our getting together, for she swore up and down that she never gives out her phone number to anyone she has just met, and yet that was exactly what she did with me. Oh no, Margie was most definitely not a barfly. Perish the thought, I tell you. Perish the thought indeed, for she was a lady in every sense of the word, and what she wanted me for was a little brother, of sorts. Okay, I must admit that I was looking for something more, especially at first, for she was a mighty fine-looking lady. Nonetheless, I quickly became very satisfied with the kind of relationship that we had, for she provided me with a sense of stability that was sorely missing in my life at the time. No, it was not that my friends and family back east were out of sight and out of mind, for they were still there for me, but there is a big difference between getting a personal letter, or even hearing a familiar voice over the phone, and actually seeing the look of understanding in the eyes of someone who really cares about you. Well, at least there is to me. Anyway, the timing was perfect, for I needed to have some stability in order to secure a much better paying job at IBP, Iowa Beef Processors. Oh yes, working at the beef was a lot better than working at Levi's or even Pizza Inn, for I was hired as a non-union night manager of the maintenance and cleanup supply department, and I really enjoyed being around most of the people who would come down to my dungeon to check out specialty tools and parts. Just before Thanksgiving Day, 1985, one of the day shift mechanics gave me the phone number of a lady from his church, who also worked at IBP in an area that I had no contact with, whom he thought would be good for me. After getting a look at Becky, I was very hopeful he was right. From the beginning, I had a feeling that she was as hopeful about me as I was about her, and after spending Thanksgiving Day with her and her children, there was no doubt about it, for she had become more and more affectionate as the day progressed, and by the time for her kids to go to bed came around, the stage was set for us to do the same. That is, except for something that she had said earlier, for she had told me that she was trying real hard to be holy in the sight of the Lord, and that it was because of that goal that she had run off previous boyfriends after having sex with them. Therefore, I did something that should have gotten me kicked out of the UMM, Union of Manly Men, for when she grabbed my hand to lead me to her promised land, I told her that I wanted her for more than one night. Talk about being pathetic. What made it even more so was that it was all for naught, for when I came by her place the next day, she did not want to even let me in the front door, let alone into her arms, and after it became clear to me that wanting to have sex was the same as actually having sex to her, I could see that there was no hope for us. A couple of weeks later, I called to ask Becky what happened, just to make sure, and the answer she gave me was truly hard to take, for she said that she felt like we were going in opposite directions. Hence, another scar upon my heart, for I was on my best behavior around her, and I was plumb serious about wanting to stay that way till death do us part. On the other hand, maybe she was right, for in March, I think, of 1986, I got fired from IBP because of being suspected of drinking on the job. No, it was not at all true, for I had not had a drink since going to bed at 9 that morning. Granted, my usual breakfast of beer at the Houlihan, a small bar and grill on the south side of town, also included a couple of shots of Bacardi 151 rum that particular morning, but even that was not really anything extraordinary for me at the time. Nonetheless, poor personal hygiene proved my undoing, for I had failed to brush my teeth before reporting to work at 5 p.m., and it was the smell of beer on my breath that was what actually got me into trouble. Oh, but that was not the only thing messed up about the situation, for the one who first said something about it was a union steward I had let smoke marijuana in my office at times, even without any benefit to myself, for I never touched the stuff. All in all, it was an educational experience, for when they asked me to blow into a breathalyzer, I registered a .026. .008 will get you a drunk driving charge in many states now, and no one in the room, including myself, had any thought of me being even the least bit drunk. After that, I went to work as a dishwasher at a Carol's restaurant. Talk about having to swallow some pride. But then a couple months later, a miracle, at least to me, transpired. For one of the electricians I had worked with at IBP came by to ask me if I would like to join him on a harvest crew for the summer. Yahoo! The kid was back in the saddle again, and there appeared to be some destiny involved, for like Domino's position to knock over the next in line, so were the steps taken to get to that point. For if I had not have went to work at IBP, I may have never met Jack. If that had have never happened, I may have never had an opportunity to go all the way to Roundup, Montana, and back behind the wheel of a GMC Brigadier with a 24-foot dump bed while towing a John Deere combine. No, I did not get to do much driving of a combine, for I was hired to be one of the truck drivers on the crew, and part of that was hauling the combines from job site to job site. Other duties involved fixing flats and performing minor servicing on the trucks, such as changing the oil and filters, greasing, etc., etc. Those hired to drive the combines in the fields drove our service rigs and towed the mobile homes that we lived in when we moved from place to place. They also helped with the maintenance of the trucks while we were out on a job, but their primary duties revolved around the combines. Therefore, there is a lot to maintaining a combine out in the fields, especially in regards to the 28-foot headers that we were running in the wheat fields that season. For that is part of the combine where the grain first enters, and the truck drivers were often drafted into helping with the servicing of them as well. Our season began in Seymour, Texas, and we stayed there for about a month because of rainy weather. Then we went back to Amarillo to do some jobs around there, which lasted a couple of weeks. The next stop was Lake, Kansas, and after a couple of weeks there, we scooted on up to Burlington, Colorado. Since I had never had any experience with row crop farming before, I had no idea that production levels could vary so greatly. For a bushel of wheat by volume should weigh 40 pounds when brought to a grain elevator, but some that we ran into was down in the 20s, while others were way over the standard. It was in Lakin where we ran into the heaviest wheat, and I was at the center of quite a stir at a grain elevator when I pulled onto the scales weighing in at over 72,000 pounds gross, for I had on a load of over 700 bushels of wheat that averaged over 68 pounds per bushel. Years later, I came to realize just how grossly overweight that truckload was in the eyes of the law, for it was, after all, just a 10-wheeler. It was sometime around the 1st of August when we drove into Hardin, Montana, and we stayed there for around a month. For aside from the hundreds of acres planted by our host, we had several other customers in the area. One of them was in Lodgegrass, Montana, which we called homegrown. No, we did not know of any pot-growing operations in the area, but we thought it was funny anyway. If you didn't get it, I guess you would have had to have been there with as much beer and Bloody Marys in you as we usually had. For working from before the sun came up until after it went down did not slacken our thirst a bit, but we did refrain from actually drinking on the job. On the other hand, we had a couple of hands who swore that they did their best work while high, hence the inside joke behind our nickname for Lodgegrass. Even though I had been around marijuana before, I had never actually lived with someone who smoked a lot. And I am here to tell you that it can have a very addictive effect upon certain individuals. For one of the hands even resorted to scraping stems and refiring the tar-like residue that had collected in the bottom of his pipe when he could not find any to buy in the area that we would be in. Oh yeah, we had our share of fun that summer, and working out of Hardin was no exception. For on days when we could not go out into the field for some reason, we were allowed to go on sightseeing expeditions. On one of those expeditions, we visited the Little Bighorn battlefield, which was not very far at all from Hardin. Just in case you missed that lesson in school, the Little Bighorn was where the very astute, being sarcastic here, Brigadier General George Armstrong Custer got himself and over 250 under his command slaughtered by a force of several thousand Oglala Sioux and Northern Cheyenne warriors being led by Sitting Bull. On another expedition, the owner of the ranch where we were staying loaded us all up and took us to the granary in Billings, Montana. Now, I don't know if it is on any list of fine dining establishments, but I would certainly eat there any time I was given an opportunity to do so. For I don't know which was better, the prime rib that we had for the main course or the Mississippi mud pie that was served as dessert. Even as good as eating was at the granary, the highlight of being in Hardin was when we went to Yellowstone on a scheduled vacation for the whole crew. For on the way there we stopped at the Buffalo Bill Museum in Cody, Wyoming, which was a wonder in and of itself, but Yellowstone was, well, Yellowstone! No, I do not have the words to describe what I saw at Yellowstone, nor am I willing to even try, for it has to be seen to be believed. When all was done in Hardin, we headed up to Roundup, to hurriedly finish a couple of jobs before winter got serious about coming, for that sort of thing can happen in September in northern Montana, and the nights were getting decidedly chillier. Speaking of such, I only thought I knew what the dead of night was like before I made it up to Roundup. For on one particular moonless night, I turned out all of the lights around to see if it really was as dark as it felt like it was, and I found that I could not see my hand in front of my face. It was plumb spooky, I tell you. Besides being plumb spooky, the added darkness added another peril to harvesting wheat up there, for the stalks were not very tall, which meant that the headers on the combines had to be lowered to where they were just skimming the ground. Subsequently, that made it very easy to scoop up rocks that littered the fields. Aside from the damage they could do to the combines, those rocks were not welcome at the grain elevators. Thankfully, none of our loads were rejected, but we sure heard about it when someone at the elevator saw a rock that we had missed. Some people in Montana really need to work on their senses of humor, is all I have to say about it. Others do not, and one of the best examples of that was a local truck driver who was hired to haul some of the grain that our combines harvested longer distances. For when he showed the picture of a couple of really good-looking young ladies that he had in his wallet, I thought he was going to bust a gut from laughing when I told him that he had some mighty fine-looking daughters. After he finished wiping the tears from his eyes, he explained to me that they were actually his wives. For he was a Hutterite, which is a sect that had split off from the Mormon Church years ago over wanting to stay true to the teaching of Joseph Smith about it being in accordance to the will of God that men should marry as many women as they could provide for. I was absolutely shocked, and for the sake of honesty, I was also rather jealous, for his young wives were absolutely gorgeous. No, wheat was not the only thing we harvested that season, for after finishing the jobs up in Montana around the 1st of September, we headed back to Amarillo to get geared up for the second half, which involved the harvesting of corn, maize, grain sorghum, soybeans, and even a patch or two of millet. Getting ready for those other crops required changing headers on the combines, for a row crop header was used to harvest corn and maize, and a flex header worked best on soybeans because of having to put the headers right on the ground. Yes, it would have been nice to have had some of them along for the wheat when we reached Montana, but being so far from home did not afford us such a luxury. I must admit that I find it rather curious that I am unable to remember all that much about the details of the second part of the season, for I remember a lot about where we went in the first half, but all I remember about the second is just being around Tulia, Texas, around 40 miles south of Amarillo, Crest, Texas, around 20 miles south of Tulia, Plainview, Texas, around 13 miles south of Crest, Hale Center, Texas, around 15 miles south of Plainview, Slayton, Texas, around 10 miles southeast of Lubbock and 130 miles south of Amarillo, Freona, Texas, around 60 miles southwest of Amarillo, Hub, Texas, around 8 miles south of Freona, Muleshoe, Texas, around 20 miles south of Hub, and Lasbuddy, Texas, around 15 miles southeast of Freona. For in regards to what we harvested at each place is almost a complete blank. Okay, I do remember a few details, for how could I forget about the owner of the place where we were harvesting millet around Slayton, Texas, almost having a heart attack from laughing so hard when my prized resist-all cowboy hat got spit out of the back of a combine after it fell off of my head while I was trying to help make an adjustment on the machine. Thankfully, both the owner and my hat made a full recovery. I also remember that it was while working out of Freona, Texas, around 60 miles southwest of Amarillo, that I ran into some trouble with an Allsup's convenience store manager by the name of Terry, for she slapped the smirk right off of my face after I smarted off something that she did not appreciate as much as I thought she should. Much to my surprise and delight, all was forgiven by the next Saturday night, for we ran into each other at the Copper Penny in Clovis, New Mexico, around 30 miles southwest of Freona, and for a month afterward a torrid romance ensued between us. Alas, it was over before it had hardly begun, but it was for the best, for if Terry and I had have stayed a couple, I would have probably had to settle for hauling cattle feed for a local company, which promised very long hours at very low wages because of her kids. Please try to understand, for staying in Freona would have been a small price to pay for being a part of their lives, but I was destined to wander far and wide for a little while longer. In fact, the next step in my progression did not end till I had driven well over 2 million miles while visiting all of the continuous 48 American states and five provinces in Canada.